Hey guys, and welcome back from your Christmas break. I hope you guys had a great one and that you are well rested and ready for a new semester. I think yesterday you were supposed to get the new syllabus. Really, nothing has changed. Pretty much everything is going to just keep on trucking. But technically, on the college side, you are starting a new semester and two new classes. So now you're going to be doing Biology 1309 and 1109, which is lecture and lab. So you get an additional 4 hours for completing this semester for a total of 8. Based on what I saw, everyone did fairly well, and hopefully you guys were able to finish strong. I know this class can be a lot, and I appreciate you guys bearing with me. And so we are going to be starting off our new semester, and we're really kind of taking a shift. So first semester primarily focused on the cellular level and things that were the cell or smaller, like things that made up the cell, cell functions, cell parts, cell processes, all of those things. And so as we move into this new semester, we're going to start focusing on the larger scale biology, what we sometimes refer to as the macro side. And so we're going to be looking at organisms and higher levels. And so we're going to start off with ecology. A lot of times this isn't even covered on the college side, but I think it's important to begin with ecology and kind of give a background, because from ecology we're going to move into evolution. And so I think you do need to have that ecological understanding before we move into the other content. And so that's what this lesson is going to be all about. The good news is that typically students have a comfort with ecology, like it's something that you understood back in middle school and freshman year, and it usually comes back pretty easily. And so what is ecology? Well, it's pretty much studying organisms and their environment, those interactions, how they get energy, the different relationships that they have, nutrient cycles. And so there's all different levels of study. Now, typically what ecologists are studying are organisms or groups of organisms and how they're adapted to their environment. How are they surviving? Are they growing? Are they declining? And so ecology is definitely a pretty broad subject, and it can definitely be broken down into different levels. Now, some of the levels that we're going to look at is we're going to look at populations and communities, ecosystems, and biomes. And so this should be a review from first semester, and this should definitely be a review from freshman biology. But remember that life is organized. So we have the basic atomic structure, molecular structure, organelles, things of that nature. But life begins with the cell. And as I mentioned, that's where we put most of our focus first semester. We will later talk about tissues and organs and organ systems as we finish out the year. But for now, we're going to focus on the organism and up. So a group of organ systems working together is an organism. Organisms make up a population. Populations living together are a community. If you throw in the non-living factors, we get an ecosystem. Similar ecosystems are biomes, and then the biosphere is the living earth. And so if you did not have this memorized from first semester, you need to go ahead and get comfortable with it now, because it's just kind of one of those core ideas of biology. So in ecology, we're going to be taking a look at populations and communities and ecosystems primarily over these two sets of notes that we're going to have. And this unit's going to work a little differently. I'll kind of describe it as we go, but you are going to have a project, and the plan is to do the notes and get all the notes out of the way, and then we'll move to the project. You'll have several days to work on it, and then we will have a test. So this unit's going to be a little bit different in that we're not going to have notes, quiz, notes, quiz. We're going to have notes, notes, project, presentations, and then we'll have a test over all the concepts. And so hopefully by the end of the week, you'll kind of understand what the project's going to be all about. And everything you need to do the project is going to be embedded within the two sets of notes. And so that'll kind of be our practice of the material, is the project. So more on that later. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. All right, so we're going to start with population ecology. And so as we saw with the organization, a population is a group of the same organisms that live in a particular area. So you could have a population of oak trees, you could have a population of humans, you could have a population of ladybugs, whatever it is. Now, typically we refer to this as a species. The organisms are the same species, which means they're a group of interbreeding individuals that can produce viable or babies that can go on and reproduce. And so we'll kind of see sometimes the concept of species not necessarily interchangeable, but we will see both of those terms directly related to each other. And so populations are dynamic. And if you're not familiar with what that word means, dynamic means it is constantly changing. Okay, we have static and we have dynamic. Static stays the same, dynamic changes. And so populations are constantly changing in terms of their composition, their numbers, and of course they're directly related to their environment. So you're going to have, weather and climate change. You could have seasonal changes. You could have disturbances and natural disasters. And of course you have other organisms that they are competing with and interacting with. And so we're going to take a look at a few different types of kind of characteristics of populations. And part of your project will include a population study. And these are the types of things that you're going to learn about your population. So we could just look at basic population size, and size is just how many you have in that particular population. There could be a population of 100, a population of 100,000, a population of 100 million, whatever it may be. And so that's just your total number. And so this is going to be constantly kind of changing. It'll go up, it'll go down. There's lots of different factors that contribute to population size. Another important characteristic is density. And so this is related to size, but it's not just the total number, it's the number per unit area. So it's pretty much how compact are they? Are they spread out? Are they very dense? So if you think about population density in terms of humans, think about a town like Texarkana, Texas. We're relatively, populated and somewhat dense. But compare Texarkana to something like New York City. Definitely a higher density there, where there's people everywhere. In terms of your housing, your apartments, a lot more people per unit area. And then you have dispersion, which is how they space out. And so we do have clumped, which tends to be the most common. So think of that in terms of like maybe ant piles. You have a clump here, a clump there, a clump there. You see uniform dispersion when you have animals that are defending their territories. They do kind of spread out evenly. And then you don't see random too often, but sometimes random could occur just to because of random distribution, like of seeds or something like that. And so here's an example of population density. Okay, so it's about the number per area. Some are more spread out, some are more compact. We can kind of look at density and distribution together, not only what is the density, but how are they distributed within that unit area. And so just kind of be familiar with those characteristics. Something else we study with population ecology is demography. You may have heard of the term demographics. I'm sure you looked at things like this when you took world geography class back when you were a freshman. But demography is looking at statistics of a population, like birth rate, death rate, immigration in, immigration out. Of course, these are the things that are going to affect the population size. Is it growing? Is it declining? One of the things we'll look at for humans is age distribution. And we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. I'm going to show you an example, but age distribution can kind of give you an overview of, is the population going to grow or decline? Like if the babies outweigh, if reproduction is high and you have lots of young people, then that population is going to grow. And then we also take a look at survivorship curves. And so same thing, we're not going to get super specific on this, but in some populations, like a human, we are what we call a type 1. Typically, your birth rate, your death rate is going to increase as you get older. For the most part, majority of young will survive, and then once we get into older age, the elderly, you see a much higher death rate. Type 2, it pretty much is a steady over time. A lot of birds are like this. Some of your egg layers, you see kind of a consistent death rate over time. These are going to probably have a lot of competition and things like that they have to deal with in the environment. And then you have something like type 3, where this is where you have populations that produce lots and lots and lots of babies, like the seeds that are produced by a tree. Or you may have a frog that lays, 1,000 eggs, and a lot of those are barely going to make it to survive. And so here's a look at these two types of features. So Once again, not going to ask you a lot of specifics, but just know that this is part of a demographic study, the age structure as well as the survivorship. So where do you see the highest death rates? All right, another important factor of a population is population growth. And every population is going to have its own particular growth pattern. And of course, population growth will be greatly affected by external influences like resource availability, how well do they reproduce, is disease and predators, are they a factor in the population? Are they present or are they absent, or are they low or high? And so population growth, we do typically see two general patterns. And in reality, we're not going to have a perfect J or a perfect S. These are just some general growth patterns that you can see within populations. The first one is exponential, and this is kind of like a doubling effect, where it starts off slow and then it grows and grows and grows and grows and grows. And you will see this in a lot of populations early on, but this is not something that can go on forever. I'm going to show you the graph here in just a second. But you will see exponential growth when conditions are ideal. As long as food and space and resources are available and pretty much unlimited, you will see growth and growth and more growth and more growth and more growth. It's kind of like bacteria in a petri dish. 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, 8 becomes 16. They just grow very rapidly. And so what you get is this exponential J curve that we'll look at here in a minute. Now, obviously, unlimited growth cannot go on forever, because there will come a time where there's too many organisms and there won't be ideal conditions and there won't be enough food and there won't be enough space and there won't be enough resources. And so what will happen is typically that exponential J curve will kind of level off to form an S curve. And what will happen is the population will reach something called carrying capacity. And this is going to be the point at which pretty much birth rate and death rate are going to level off, and you're going to have somewhat of a stable type of population. And so that J will level off to form an S like this. So as long as resources are plentiful and everything is great, a population can grow, grow, grow. But eventually that will probably level off, and that's when we get this S logistic growth curve. And so just pay attention to this right here, the carrying capacity. The carrying capacity is the point at which that growth levels off. And, one of the things you'll look at when you're studying a population is the population below its carrying capacity? Is it at its carrying capacity? Is it above its carrying capacity? Because this is going to affect the birth and the death rate. If you're well below carrying capacity, there's going to be room for growth. If you're at carrying capacity, it's going to be, kind of increased competition, but relatively stable. But then once you go over carrying capacity, obviously, if we reach the largest number of individuals that the environment can support and we go over that, then that death rate is going to go up. And so carrying capacity just kind of represents that max number. What is the max amount of organisms that field can support, or that pond can support, or that tree can support, whatever that environment may be. All right, now some of the things that are going to limit growth, we call these limiting factors. They could be density dependent or they could be density independent. And so don't let the length of these terms fool you. The words kind of tell you what you need to know. If it's density dependent, it depends on the density or size. And so these particular factors are going to affect larger, more dense populations more. And typically these are your biotic factors. If you have more organisms in a smaller space, competition is going to be higher, predation will be higher, parasitism and disease will be higher. If you have organisms that are spread out, things like disease and competition are not nearly as big of a factor. So density dependent factors are going to be biotic things that kind of keep that population in check, and larger populations will be affected more by them. Now, density independent do not really matter when it comes to the size of the population. And these are typically going to be your abiotic factors. So if you have a major natural disaster, a hurricane, a tsunami, a forest fire, whatever it is, if you have this major disaster, it doesn't matter whether the population was small or the population was large, they're all going to be affected by this major change. So you have, an ice storm, or you have climate change, small and large will all be affected alike, okay? And so sometimes this is kind of biotic, but human activities could lead to, kind of a limiting factor in a population. If we go in and clear cut a forest, every population lost its home, whether it's small or whether it's big. All right, sometimes we call this environmental resistance. So these are some things that will keep your populations in check. Once again, density dependent are going to be biotic factors that affect large populations more. Density independent are abiotic factors that affect all population sizes the same. All right, now we're going to shift to our next level. So we have, population ecology, where we're looking at individual populations of organisms, but we can also look at them in terms of a community, which is a group of organisms or a group of populations that are occupying a similar habitat. And so community ecology is going to involve studying the kind of populations or the organism's niche or niche within that community. What is their role? And it's also going to include how they interact with the other populations. So we're going to start with the niche. Okay, sometimes I've always said niche, which is probably incorrect. So the ecological niche. This is going to be the role of an organism in that community. So is it a producer? Is it a consumer? Is it a decomposer? What nutrients does it need? What food does it eat? What home does it build? It's essentially going to be its total way of life. And we're talking its habitat, its relationships, its resources, its reproduction. All of those things fit within the niche of that population. Some of them are going to have maybe a more important role than others, but each group is going to have a slightly different role. And what you'll find is that you really can't have two populations with the same niche, because then you have way too much competition between them, and one of them is going to lose out. So some other things we're going to study within the community are going to be these interspecific interactions. And so the first thing I want to do is make sure you understand this word. Okay, inter, that prefix means between, and specific here is referring to species. So this means between two or more species, different species, okay? So we're going to be looking at things like competition, predation, and symbiosis. And in every single one of these interspecific interactions, the population of one will affect the population of the other in terms of numbers and growth and stability. It's going to be very important to the organisms, because these relationships affect their numbers, and they could lead to things like evolution or extinction. So these are a huge part of community ecology. And more than likely you probably remember these, and they're pretty basic and they're easy to understand, but we're still going to cover them anyway. So the first interaction is going to be competition. And notice that is a lose-lose, because if you're competing for resources, you're essentially competing for survival. You're competing for food, you're competing for space, you're competing for water, and the more limited the resource, the greater the competition is going to be. And so anytime you have shared resources, you will have competition. And this is one of those density dependent factors that large populations will be affected by this more. And like I mentioned earlier, you can't really have two populations occupying the same niche, because there would just be too much competition between them. We'll also see this leading to things like resource partitioning. To ensure survival, a lot of times populations will kind of specialize. Maybe these birds feed and nest in the top of the tree, and other birds feed and nest in the lower part of the tree. And that way they don't have too much overlap and too much competition. Now, we're primarily focusing on interspecific relationships in this lesson, but competition is one that could be intra, which means within. So like you could have two males competing for a female, or you could have two deer competing for some food or something. But once again, we're kind of mainly focusing on that between two different species. Our next one is predation, and I imagine coming into this class you already know about predator-prey relationships. The predator eats and the prey gets eaten. And a lot of times we only think of this as like, these large cats chasing down the antelope. But in reality, a predator-prey relationship could also be an herbivore. So the giraffe, grazing or eating the leaves off of a tree, because potentially it could lead to the death or the destruction of that plant. So anytime you have consumption, even if it's something like a filter feeder, like a well, or something like a sponge, we still have a predator-prey relationship. Not all predators have sharp teeth and run fast. Now, it is important to understand that in these relationships, both the predator and the prey have special adaptations, because it's all about survival out there in these communities. And so you could have camouflage, you could have speed, good eyesight. A lot of times mimicry, you will see like the butterflies that look alike or the snakes that look alike, to kind of keep them from being eaten. And then normally we see some really close relationships. We see these cycles of numbers. As one increases, the other may decrease, or as one increases, the other may increase. And so usually these relationships kind of cycle together in their population numbers. And then the third relationship is going to be symbiosis, and these are also referred to as symbiotic relationships. And anytime you see symbiosis, it refers to a very close interaction between two different species. And when we say close, it could sometimes mean like one organism living on another, or it could mean one organism living in another, or they just live in very close contact, and they at least one of them has got to benefit from the relationship. And so we do have three types here. We have mutualism, which is a win-win. It's the smiley face, and this is where both species are deriving a benefit. We see this a lot in things like nutrition. Some allow another to get food. We could see this in things like reproduction, like pollination. We can see it in protection, like the clownfish and the anemone. The anemone kind of protects the clownfish and gives it a place to live. And then the clownfish is going to attract fish for the anemone to eat. If there's a cleaning effect, like cleaning teeth or cleaning bugs off or ticks off, that's going to be a mutualistic relationship. Some that we'll see with nutrition are things like lichens and mycorrhiza. We'll talk about those later in other units. Our next one is commensalism, and notice this is a win-neutral. One benefits and the other really doesn't care. And normally we have a home like a tree providing shade, or a tree providing a place for a nest, or it could be something like transportation, like whales moving barnacles. Then we have parasitism, which is a win-lose. And so parasitism is going to be similar to predation, but ultimately the parasite isn't necessarily killing the host initially. It's just deriving nourishment. Okay, it's all about nourishment. The parasite will get nourishment and nutrients from the host. It could be a plant parasite like mistletoe. It could be a protist parasite like an amoeba. It could be a bacterial parasite, an animal parasite like a tapeworm. So they're found in all kingdoms. And your parasites could live inside the host or outside the host, like a tick or a tapeworm over here. And so there's all different types, but ultimately that host is going to be harmed when that parasite gets nutrition from it. And so here's some examples. If you're not familiar with examples already, I put a few up here for you to kind of look at. We as humans have mutualistic relationships, like with bacteria. Pollinators and the flowers that they pollinate have a very important mutualistic relationship. These are a big part of ecosystems and how they function. And then a lot of times what we'll see in these close relationships, now that's going to be both your symbiotic relationships and your predator-prey, is we'll see this evolutionary pattern called co-evolution. And this is where two species evolve together. As one changes, so does the other. The change in one triggers a change in the other. As the prey evolves, so does the predator. Or as the predator evolves, so does the prey. And so all of these close relationships will often lead to this coevolution where species kind of evolve and change and adapt in response to each other and that close relationship that they share. And then the last thing we're going to talk about today is ecological succession. And succession is ultimately change. And so we mentioned how the populations were dynamic, communities are going to be dynamic. Communities are constantly going to be regulated by these interactions and disturbances that are ongoing, okay? And so what will happen is that will lead to ecological succession, which are essentially kind of these expected patterned changes that will occur. Typically what you see in succession is you see an increase in biodiversity, increase in the number of species, and then we also see a move toward a more stable state. Now, the end result of succession is going to be something called a climax community. It may not always be reached, and it will not be maintained for forever, because what will happen is another disturbance will come in, and that could lead to ecological succession. Now, ecological succession can happen on all different scales, small changes, large changes, but there are two major types of succession, two kind of major patterns that you'll see. You'll see primary succession, which occurs where there is no soil. This is where we have the establishment of a community, and it begins with just bare rock. So a lot of times this could be due to a volcanic eruption, the formation of a volcanic island. It doesn't pop up out of the water full of life, okay? It starts off as a rock. You could have glacial retreat that exposes the rock below. You could have an abandoned parking lot that was concrete. Now, it'll usually start with these lichens, and this is what we call our pioneer species. The first organisms to kind of live there are going to be your pioneer species. And lichens are actually a mutualistic relationship between algae and fungi. They kind of look lettucey or mossy, but they can actually grow on just bare rock, and over time they can help create the soil. Now, the second major type of succession is secondary, and this is where we do have soil, but there was a disturbance that changed a community. And so what we're going to see is a return to the community that was already existing. And this is going to happen a little faster because the soil was still intact. So we don't have to go through the process of making the soil. You could clear cut a forest. You'll see this when they go in and, they harvest the corn, and then they go in and they just kind of let it sit for a little while. The forest fires, those are all going to leave the soil intact. And so you'll still have a disturbance, but we're not starting with bare rock. And so typically your pioneer species here are going to be grasses. And in both cases, you see this slow progression. You see this increase in biodiversity, this increase in vegetation, this increase from small plants and grasses and bushes to larger trees. And then with more vegetation comes more animals and other types of organisms. And that is going to finish up our first lesson of the semester. Hopefully you remember a lot of that back from biology your freshman year, but if not, I do want you to kind of study this. Don't think that because we're not taking a quiz, you don't need to be looking at the notes. We will be reviewing some of these things as we do our project, but I would still be studying your notes, and don't try to wait until the last minute because you will be taking a test over both sets of notes at the same time. So that's going to wrap up our first lesson. I hope to see you guys soon. I don't start back for about another week, so I may try to swing on by at some point. And I hope you guys have a great day. As always, if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to email me, and hopefully I will talk to you soon.